Welcome back all to another video. This time we're covering the history of the London Overground, and this is a behemoth, so stay tuned folks. The lines on the current Overground are rather complicated and are a mishmash of different companies, different routes, and several years worth of tracks as well. So to help us out a little bit, we're going to split it up into their own individual lines. So we have the North London line, the East London line, the South London line, and the West London line, which form the circle as we know roughly today. There's also the Goblin line, the Watford to Euston line, the Lee Valley lines, and let's not forget the Romford Upminster line. God, I'll tell you what, that's actually quite a lot of lines. So we're going to divide this up into separate videos, starting with the West London line. So the West London line is a short railway that links Clapham Junction to Wilson Junction. It is a pretty significant cross-London route because Clapham Junction is a major hub connecting to the South West Main Line and Southern Main Lines, as well as the South London line and routes to Reading, whilst Wilson Junction in the north has access to London Overground services, including the Watford DC line and the North London line, as well as the Bakerloo Underground line. The West Coast Main Line also runs through here, although it doesn't stop, and there is potential to connect to HS2 and the Lizzie line. The line has always been such an important connection, not only for freight as it was for many years, but also for current Southern trains and the London Overground connecting passenger services from South to North London. But where did it all begin? So we actually have to go back to 1836, when the Bristol, Birmingham and Thames Railway was formed and gained permission to build the line from a current station near Wilson Junction down towards the Kensington Canal, an ex-tributary of the Thames. The idea was to connect the Kensington Canal, which had access to the Thames and the docks, to railway lines heading to Bristol and Birmingham. However, construction was delayed and little progress had been made in the following years. A year later, by 1837, GWR had built an at-grade crossing with this railway and had precedence over its trains. And by 1839, the railway company purchased the canal for £36,000, hoping to have rights over it. However, this led to even more debt, and railway services failed to pick up. So, because there was a lack of money, the company decided to change its name to the West London Railway Company and go back to the government asking for another £75,000. The line finally opened in 1844, almost 6 or 7 years after they'd gained permission to build, with stations at Wormwood Scrubs for the line up to Birmingham, a platform to exchange with GWR services at that crossing point, Shepherd's Bush, which is one of many if you go check that video out, and Kensington. The line didn't really do too well, and within 6 months of it opening, was closed again, and the company was now in £60,000 worth of debt. A year later in 1845, GWR decided to team up with the London and Birmingham Railway Company and began leasing the line to run coal trains up until about 1854. And around this time, London had begun expanding rapidly, and GWR had plans to head south of the river and began pushing its plan to do so. This was eventually passed by Parliament in 1859, and GWR wasted no time and started building, and by 1863 it was now open. This was done by filling in the Kensington Canal, so it's now a sewer that runs underneath London. And on top of this, the route also obliged them to build 4 different connections from its southern end, connecting into Clapham Junction existing lines, which are to head east to Waterloo, west to existing Richmond platforms, one to head underneath all the tracks and then west, heading down towards Brighton and the South Coast Main Line, and another heading east, what is Longhedge Junction, with tracks to Victoria and the South London line. Chelsea and Fulham was also opened, as well as Battersea Station, and a year later in 1869, Kensington Addison Road Station was opened, which is known today as Olympia, and became a major link for many railways. A GWR route from Southall to Victoria was opened, as well as a route from Richmond to Waterloo via Addison Road. A little later in 1864, the Hammersmith and City line, known then as the Metropolitan Railway, built a connection, developing the Middle Circle in 1872. The London North Western Railway Company also began operating the Outer Circle from Broad Street to Clapham Junction and on to Victoria. There's another video of all the London Ring Rail schemes which you should go check out if you're interested. It was all going so well for everyone, but what went wrong? Well, the deep level tube lines came and passenger numbers dwindled. They fell so much that passenger services completely stopped running. This, as well as the war, of course. Soon after, in 1948, British Rail took over most of London's railways and largely used it for freight. Not much happened until 1977, where it was then thought about being redeveloped by the Greater London Council, and a limited branch service was operated between Clapham Junction and Olympia to about 1994, when Network South Eastern took over and began running full-blown lines from Clapham Junction to North Woolwich via the North London line. Around this time, the new franchise scheme was coming in, and eventually National Express won the contract and renamed it to Silverlink, which I think many people still know it as today. And a good few years later, as part of the redevelopment scheme for the Olympics, London Overground took over the scheme and created what we now know as the Overground network. So who runs on the tracks now? Well, you got some Overground services running from Clapham Junction to Stratford. You also got Southern, who operate a service from, I think, East Croydon all the way up to Milton Keynes. And that's about it. But if you have a look at some of the previous services, these were far more interesting. So you used to have Virgin Cross Country, who used to run services from Manchester and Edinburgh all the way down to Brighton via the West London line. Similarly, Southern used to operate a service from Rugby to Victoria, again via the West London line and Clapham Junction. And I guess it was, and still is, one of London's most important cross-city connections. And that's it for this one. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for the next one, and I'll see you next time.